History remembers the ones who did, but it forgets the ones who almost did. Every great tragedy we escaped leaves behind a shadow, an invisible bruise on the timeline. And sometimes, buried in that bruise, there's a name, a man who stood in the crowd and almost rewrote history. His name doesn't appear in any textbook. You won't find him on any list of assassins or conspirators, but in a classified memo dated June 1978, a line appears in small type. Subject displayed proximity to the presidential route. Intent undetermined. That subject, intent undetermined, was a man named Samuel Hart, a man no one remembers because remembering him would mean admitting how close we came. Samuel was born in Ohio, 1941, a machinist's son. Ordinary childhood. Baseball, cigarettes, factory whistles, the sound of AM radio on Sunday mornings. Nothing remarkable, except a restlessness that never left him. When he was 15, he watched the motorcade of President Eisenhower roll through Cleveland. He told his friends later, the man looked like he could change the weather just by raising his hand. That was the moment, the first spark of fascination, not with politics, but with power. Over the years, that fascination curdled into something darker. He joined the army in '61. Stationed in Berlin, learned how to shoot, how to disappear, how to follow orders. But when he came home, America had changed. And so had he. Factories were closing, his father was gone. His town, like him, was forgotten. He began collecting things. Newspaper clippings, photographs, speeches. Every president since Kennedy. He said he was studying history, but what he was really doing was rehearsing. In a letter found decades later, Samuel wrote, "To touch history, you have to be close enough to burn." No one knew who he sent it to. Maybe no one. Maybe everyone. By the early 1970s, he drifted to Washington, worked odd jobs. A guard here, a janitor there, always near the edges of power, but never inside. He had a habit of standing too long at public events. Secret Service flagged him twice. Never arrested, never charged, just noted. And that's how men like Samuel slip through the cracks, because they don't look dangerous until they are. His apartment was small, windowless, and perfectly organized. Neighbors said he never smiled, but never seemed angry either. He kept the radio on at all hours, late-night talk shows, the kind that feed on paranoia and politics. He started keeping a journal. Each page was numbered, cross-referenced, and dated. Every entry began the same way. He appears today at 3:40 p.m. Who he was changed. Sometimes the president, sometimes a senator, sometimes a name no one recognized, but the fixation was always the same. When the FBI finally opened those journals years later, they called it the Diary of a Ghost, because Samuel was everywhere. In photographs, in parade footage, standing just beyond the frame, but nowhere you could touch. He moved with precision, like a man preparing for something inevitable, something he believed was already written. In one photo, taken outside a campaign rally in 1978, you can see him behind the barrier. Plain shirt, hands in pockets. The president waves. Samuel doesn't. He just watches, eyes fixed, expression unreadable, as if he's seeing not the man, but the moment. The one where everything could change. That photo was taken 7 days before what the FBI later called the near event. 7 days before the plan that almost succeeded. 7 days before the world almost woke up to another headline that would have scarred the century. But at that time, no one knew. To everyone else, Samuel Hart was just another man in the crowd. Sometimes history doesn't scream before it changes. Sometimes it just waits, and somewhere, inside that silence, a man like Samuel starts to listen. What turns fascination into obsession? It never happens all at once. It starts as curiosity, a glance that lingers a little too long, a thought that refuses to fade. Then, somewhere along the way, it begins to eat. Samuel Hart didn't wake up one morning and decide to kill a president. No one does. He drifted there, one small surrender at a time. His co-workers at the Capitol Maintenance Department said he was quiet, polite, punctual, never drank, never smiled much, never joined for lunch. But when he was alone, he would take the service elevator to the upper floors, places he wasn't assigned, and just walk. He'd look at the doors marked restricted, the ones leading to the offices of men who shaped the world. He told a colleague once, "You can tell a man's power by how many locks guard his hallway." In his notebook from that year, he drew floor plans, angles, distances. He wasn't building anything. He was studying proximity, how close one could get before being noticed. Investigators later said it was as if he was mapping the pulse of Washington itself, testing how power moved, how it could be reached, and maybe how it could be stopped. But obsession isn't just about planning, it's about belief. And Samuel had come to believe something. In one of his tapes, Yes, he recorded himself. He said, "They build walls not to keep us out, but to keep themselves in. The powerful live inside their own fortress. Somebody has to remind them that walls can fall." No one knows who he was talking to. Maybe to the tape recorder. Maybe to the world he thought was listening. By 1978, his fascination had crystallized into a kind of mission. He started writing letters, not to people, but to institutions, the White House, the CIA, the Washington Post, each one signed the same way, a witness to history. Most were intercepted, filed away, forgotten. One, though, reached an aide in the Office of Public Correspondence. The aide wrote a brief internal memo. "Individual seems unstable but non-threatening." That line, non-threatening, would haunt an agent years later. But what's more haunting than what he wrote is what he didn't write. There were gaps in his journals, missing pages, sections ripped out, burned. Neighbors noticed smoke from his apartment late at night. They thought he was just cooking. He wasn't. He was erasing evidence of himself. Everything but the plan. You can trace the spiral if you look closely. He lost his job, sold his car, moved to a smaller apartment closer to the city center. He began attending open rallies, political gatherings, anywhere he could stand near the edge of the crowd and observe. People think obsession is loud, manic, visible, explosive, but it's not. It's quiet. It's methodical. It's the sound of a man rehearsing the same gesture again and again until it feels like fate. In one surveillance photo, he's seen standing outside a hotel ballroom where the president was scheduled to speak. He's wearing the same gray jacket he always wore, hands behind his back, looking not at the building, but at the crowd, almost like he was studying the choreography of attention. Later, a behavioral analyst from Quantico would call Samuel Hart a philosopher of control. He didn't crave fame or revenge. He craved symmetry, the illusion that he could bring balance to a world that had ignored him. That's the most terrifying kind of fanatic, the one who believes he's restoring order. Around this time, something or someone found him. A letter from 1977 references a friend from the Navy. No such record exists, but that letter contained a single cryptic line: "The circle agrees. Operation Glass Key proceeds." No one knows who wrote it. No return address. But after that, Samuel's life changed. He started receiving money, small wire transfers through Western Union, sent from anonymous locations. His rent was paid in cash. He bought a shortwave radio, a second-hand typewriter, and, most disturbingly, a rifle scope. He never purchased the weapon it attached to, or if he did, it was never found. The FBI called this the silent escalation. No manifestos, no threats, no dramatic declarations, just a man slowly aligning himself with a purpose no one else could see. By spring of '78, the White House security logs show multiple near encounters, unidentified individuals matching his description along motorcade routes. Each time, by the time an agent moved to question him, he was gone, vanished back into the city like a ghost dissolving into noise. If you study those reports, and I did, you notice something chilling. Every sighting moves closer. Closer to the route, closer to the vehicle, closer to the man inside it. It's as if he was testing the perimeter, step by step. And then, 1 week in June, the entries stopped. For 7 days, no sightings, no movement, nothing. That was the week the operation began. A security memo from that time, declassified only recently, contains a single line that reads, "Possible coordinated surveillance activity by unknown individuals. Subject of interest, Hart, Samuel." It would take decades before anyone understood how true that was, because Samuel wasn't working alone anymore. He had become part of something larger, a network that didn't exist on paper, but left its fingerprints all over the margins of history. And if you trace those fingerprints, they lead to one terrifying truth. The plan was already in motion, and it was closer to success than anyone realized. The anatomy of obsession is simple. It starts with a gaze and ends with a plan. In every century, there are plots that never earn a headline, because to acknowledge them would mean admitting that the walls of government are thinner than we think. Samuel Hart had crossed that wall without even noticing, not by breaking in, but by being useful. It started with a voice, a man who called himself Denton. No first name, no last name, just Denton. He'd met Samuel once, years earlier, in an army barracks overseas. At least, that's what Samuel claimed. Whether Denton ever existed as one man or as several is still unclear. What matters is what he offered: validation. He told Samuel that his ideas were right, that the country had been taken hostage by men behind desks, that elections were theater, that power had become a disease. And for the first time, Samuel felt seen. The FBI would later call Denton the ghost architect. He left no paper trail, no address, no bank account, but he had connections to disgruntled intelligence officers, to to veterans who felt betrayed, to ideologues who believed the republic needed cleansing. They weren't radicals in the streets. They were bureaucrats, engineers, analysts, people who'd seen too much and trusted too little. They called themselves the Circle. No manifesto, no symbols, just the idea that America had strayed and someone had to guide it back. One member, later identified only as RK, described them as a club for ghosts who still believed in duty. They met in diners outside the Beltway, motels off Route 50, rented basements in Arlington. No leader, no minutes, just quiet men drinking bad coffee, planning something they claimed was necessary. And somewhere in those meetings, Samuel found his purpose. He wasn't the planner. He wasn't the shooter. He was the witness. That was his title inside the group, the witness. The one who would stand in the crowd and see the moment the world shifted. The Circle told him history needed a correction. They didn't talk about killing a man. They talked about resetting the narrative. The language was always clean, almost bureaucratic. They said things like, the event, the signal, the transfer, never the word murder. It made it sound like paperwork. Decades later, when fragments of their correspondence surfaced, analysts noticed a chilling pattern. Every letter ended with the same sentence. Truth is a matter of timing, and that timing was approaching. The Circle had insiders, people who knew routes, schedules, rotations, a janitor at a radio station that received advance motorcade bulletins, a former Secret Service driver who still had friends on the inside, even a congressional aide who passed information for patriotic reasons. Piece by piece, they built the framework of Operation Glass Key. No one remembers who chose the name, but the metaphor fit. A key so fragile that using it might shatter the lock forever. Their plan was to strike during a fundraising event at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. A simple setting, bright lights, cameras, predictable security. The president would arrive at 7:40 p.m., exit the motorcade, walk 20 steps through the side entrance. For 20 seconds, the world's most protected man would be exposed. They didn't need 20, they needed 2. But here's the part that haunts investigators. Even now, no one can say definitively whether Samuel Hart knew when the plan would unfold. Some believe he was only meant to observe, to record proof that the Circle existed. Others think he was the contingency, the backup, the man who'd finish the job if the first attempt failed. All we know is that, in the days before the Mayflower event, Samuel's journal entries changed. No more detached observations, just sentences written like prayers. History bends next week. Every man gets one truth. Glass breaks clean. And then, on June 14th, 1978, the entries stopped. That night, the Circle assembled in a rented garage in Alexandria. 8 men, blueprints on the wall, a radio tuned to police frequencies. They rehearsed timing, camera placement, escape routes. At 2 a.m., a police cruiser passed by. They froze. No raid, no arrests, just coincidence. But one of them, an older veteran named Miller, panicked. He left the group, vanished, surfaced 2 years later in Mexico. He'd tell a journalist, off the record, "We came within hours of changing the world. Then I lost my nerve." That single moment, a cruiser passing by an unmarked garage, may have saved a president's life, because by dawn, the Circle began to fracture. Funds stopped arriving. A courier disappeared, and Samuel Hart, their quiet witness, began to doubt. He wrote one last note, never sent, found later folded into a library book. What if history doesn't want to be changed? After that, nothing. No sightings, no letters, no voice recordings. He simply vanished. The FBI concluded the Circle dissolved before executing the plan. But among declassified papers, there's one file marked unknown outcome. It includes a photograph, grainy, overexposed, showing a man who looks like Samuel Hart, standing alone on a rain-soaked street near the Mayflower Hotel. Timestamp 7:42 p.m. Exactly the minute the president's car arrived. So maybe the Circle failed. Or maybe the plan worked in a different way. Not to end a life, but to prove how easily it could be ended. A demonstration, not a detonation. Because sometimes conspiracies aren't meant to succeed. They're meant to remind those in power that they're mortal. And perhaps that was the Circle's real message. Power is only as safe as the people who believe in it. A conspiracy without a name doesn't need one. Its silence is its identity. And its failure, its almost, becomes the only reason we ever learn it existed at all. The city of Washington is at its quietest before dawn. But in that quiet, every light means something. An aide working late, a driver waiting, a man rehearsing history. June 10th, 1978, 5 days before the event. Samuel Hart woke at 3 a.m. and walked the empty streets near DuPont Circle. He carried no bag, no camera, no gun, just a small notebook and a pocket radio tuned to static. The static, he said once in a tape, helped him think between the noise. In another part of the city, members of the circle met for what would be their last meeting. No minutes were kept, but one fragment survives, a torn sheet found years later inside an archived security file. On it, 4 words: "Window of opportunity closed." We don't know if that was a command to stop or a warning to hurry. Every day that week, Samuel followed the same ritual. He walked the motorcade route, sometimes twice. He timed the lights. He memorized faces: police, reporters, vendors. He even learned the sound of the president's helicopter leaving Andrews Air Force Base, as if studying the rhythm of power itself. Agents would later retrace his steps and find the small marks he left in the margins of the city. A thumbprint on a railing, a single penciled X on a lamppost near the Mayflower, a scrap of tape on a telephone pole. It looked like paranoia. It was really choreography, the last dance of a man who wanted control over something uncontrollable. June 12th, the circle's funding disappeared overnight. Whatever invisible patron had been feeding them stopped. 2 members fled. Another was found in his apartment with an empty suitcase and an unpaid rent notice. No note, no sign of violence, just absence. Yet Samuel stayed. In a way, the collapse of the circle freed him. Without orders, he was alone again with his obsession, and that made him unpredictable. A surveillance report written that week described him as calm, purposeful, detached from outcome. Those words terrified the agent who wrote them, because a man detached from outcome has nothing left to lose. June 14th, morning rain. The president's staff debated canceling the fundraiser. They didn't. History hinged on weather and stubbornness. At 5 p.m., the first guests arrived. At 6:50, the motorcade left the White House. At 7:35, it turned onto Connecticut Avenue. In the crowd were hundreds: donors, journalists, onlookers, and one man with gray eyes standing beneath a streetlight that flickered every few seconds. We don't know what Samuel carried. Maybe a camera, maybe nothing. A photograph taken by a tourist caught him half-turned, looking not at the president, but at the horizon, as if something beyond the scene had caught his attention. At 7:42, a transformer blew 2 blocks away. The streetlights blinked out. For 7 seconds, Washington went dark. The motorcade slowed. Secret Service agents tensed. Then, the backup generator at the Mayflower roared to life. When the lights returned, Samuel was gone. The blackout was traced to a short circuit caused by rainwater in an underground cable. A coincidence, they said. But some still believe it wasn't, because in those 7 seconds, the world teetered on the edge of another headline. The following morning, a hotel maid found a key in an empty locker in Union Station. A storage tag read "glass key." Inside, nothing. No weapon, no papers, just an envelope containing a single Polaroid of the president stepping from his car, smiling. On the back, written in tidy handwriting, "The moment passed." No one ever proved Samuel left it there, but the handwriting matched his journals. 3 days later, his apartment was empty. No forwarding address, no body ever found. Only a radio left on, hissing the same soft static he used to listen to at night. The circle scattered, hunted by rumor more than by law. Some died, some vanished. Denton, if he was real, was never identified, and the government closed the file with 2 words stamped in red: event averted. But avert is not the same as prevent. It means something was already in motion and simply failed to arrive, like a train that misses its stop but keeps moving in the dark. Maybe that's what history does too. Maybe it moves through near disasters we never see, guided by chance and fear and people we'll never know. And maybe, on some level, Samuel Hart understood that his act, or his refusal to act, would disappear into silence, that he would become not the man who changed history, but the man who almost did. The week everything almost changed ended not with violence, but with a power outage and a man stepping back into the dark. When the lights came back on, the world carried on. That's the cruel thing about history. It doesn't stop to notice the moments it narrowly avoids. There were speeches, champagne, applause. No one in the ballroom of the Mayflower knew that outside, for 7 seconds, the line between order and chaos had vanished. The president left that night smiling, shaking hands, unaware that his motorcade route had already been red-flagged by 2 separate field offices, unaware that a name, Samuel Hart, had just been added to a list that would never see daylight. By dawn, men in dark suits combed the area. They collected cigarette butts, footprints, fragments of tape from a lamppost. They photographed everything, then sealed the photos with classification codes so obscure that even now most remain unread. Officially, the incident was labeled electrical interference. Unofficially, it was called the Almost. Within 48 hours, A quiet cleanup began. Files disappeared, witnesses forgot. An agent who'd been watching Hart for months was reassigned to Nebraska. Another who questioned the blackout report was told simply, "You saw a malfunction, not a miracle." That's how democracies protect themselves, not always with truth, but with tidy stories. In the weeks that followed, rumors rippled through the intelligence community. A ghost cell inside the government. A failed coup. A man who walked away from destiny. Most dismissed it as paranoia. But in the private archives of the Bureau, a small envelope remained. Inside, the Polaroid from the locker, and a note written in pencil. He blinked. No one ever confirmed who wrote it. What happened to Samuel Hart afterward is still uncertain. Some say he fled north, lived under another name in Canada, working night shifts at a steel plant until the early 90s. Others claim he died in South America, buried under a different passport. There's even a theory, whispered by a retired agent, that Hart was quietly absorbed into a witness protection program, not for his safety, but for the country's, because to testify would mean proving how fragile the fortress really was. Every few years, a photograph surfaces, a face in a crowd that resembles him, always blurred, always watching. Meanwhile, the circle evaporated. The men who once called themselves patriots became phantoms. One drowned under suspicious circumstances. Another resurfaced in an arms trafficking trial, then vanished before sentencing. No direct evidence tied any of them to Operation Glass Key. But their silence did, and silence is often the loudest confession. The political machine, of course, moved on. New administrations came and went. Laws were passed. Wars were fought. But if you read the memos from that era, you notice something subtle, a tightening. Security budgets tripled, motorcade routes shortened. The president's public appearances grew rarer, more controlled, as if power itself had felt a shiver and pulled its coat a little tighter. Every country has moments like this, when the story almost changes but doesn't, and the people who hold that secret carry it like a stone in their pocket, too heavy to forget, too dangerous to share. In 1999, a researcher from the National Archives named Lisa McCready found an unmarked box in a restricted storage room. Inside were transcripts of intercepted shortwave broadcasts from the late 70s. Among them, one frequency stood out, 10.44 megahertz, a repeating message. Truth is a matter of timing. She recognized the phrase from an old conspiracy memo. When she tried to trace the source, the signal had stopped 35 minutes before she arrived. She filed a report. It was stamped received, then misplaced. No follow-up. Sometimes, the echo of an event outlives the event itself. The deeper investigators looked, the more they found fragments, never enough to form a whole. A torn receipt from a diner, a name scratched into a matchbook, a photograph of a man staring into a mirror that wasn't there the day before. Each clue felt like the city whispering, "You were close." But close is not the same as truth. Truth, like timing, slips. And so the files were sealed again. The circle became myth. Samuel Hart became a ghost story told by agents who'd seen too much. The president lived out his term, unaware that history had once paused its breath in front of him. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was containment. Because sometimes survival demands amnesia, and sometimes the only thing more dangerous than what almost happened is remembering that it almost did. Every history book tells you what happened. Almost none tell you what didn't. The untaken shots, the accidents that didn't become disasters, the quiet, private mercies that no one celebrates. That's where the story of Samuel Hart lives now, in the space between fact and forgiveness. After the investigation faded, Washington went back to its rhythm. Convoys, speeches, televised certainty. But the air had changed. Those who knew the file could feel it. The faint tension that comes after a held breath. It's the feeling of a country that doesn't know it's been spared. A retired agent once said, "History isn't written by the winners. It's written by whoever cleans up fastest." Maybe that's true, because the cleanup after 1978 was immaculate. The photographs disappeared. The names were redacted. The file was renamed Administrative Anomaly 42B. The world forgot, and yet the feeling remained. Sometimes I think about him, the man who spent half his life trying to touch history and then vanished just as he reached it. Did he finally understand that changing the world isn't the same as healing it? Or did he still believe that one act, one spark, could set things right? We'll never know. But in a way, he left us a mirror, because every person who hears his story asks the same silent question. What would I have done? Would I have stopped? Would I have stepped back from the edge as he did? Maybe that's the hidden mercy of his story. That for once, obsession yielded to hesitation. That a single second of doubt outweighed a decade of conviction. And that the world we live in now, imperfect, unhealed, still turning, exists because one man blinked. There's a word historians use: counterfactual. It means the version of events that never happened, the ghosts of possibilities. But counterfactuals aren't fiction. They're the invisible scaffolding that holds up reality. For every headline we know, there's another beneath it, unwritten, still humming with what-ifs. Samuel Hart was a counterfactual in human form. Proof that history can hinge on silence as much as on action, on the absence of a single sound. When people talk about destiny, they imagine thunder, banners, decisive moments. But sometimes destiny is quiet. Sometimes it's a man standing in the rain, realizing he could destroy everything and choosing not to. That choice will never appear in textbooks. It won't have a monument, but it shaped the century all the same. We'll never know where he went. Maybe somewhere far from Washington. Maybe just far enough inside himself that no one could find him again. But every time a motorcade passes, every time a crowd gathers and the air tightens with anticipation, his shadow walks among them. A reminder that history isn't only made by those who act, but also by those who stop. Because the measure of a civilization isn't how many of its stories end in triumph or tragedy. It's how many end in restraint. And restraint, quiet, invisible, uncelebrated, is the heaviest weight of all.